Hi folks, and welcome back to Meaningful Money. Okay, here I am, still on Marazion Beach with St Michael's Mount behind me, still freezing. It's a Saturday morning, got ears are turning blue I think, but never mind. So we talked a little bit about inflation last time, what it is and how it's controlled and why it needs to be controlled. But what do you care? What does it matter to you? What difference does it make? Well, probably like you, I never gave inflation a second thought before I became a financial planner. Simply because you just expect things to go up in prices over time. It's not a big deal. What's all the fuss about? And to be honest, that's largely true. If you are in a job and you can expect hopefully steady wage increases over time, well, you probably don't need to worry too much about inflation, because generally speaking, earnings, the general level of earnings rises quicker than inflation rises. So, if inflation over a year is 3%, so everything goes up in price by 3%, but you get a 4% wage increase, well, then you're 1% better off, aren't you? You've got a little bit more money to blow because the increase in your wages has covered the increase in the prices and a bit more. So that's okay. And that's generally what happens. If you're earning and can expect regular rises, then you can largely ignore inflation. It just doesn't seem to be much of a big deal. Yes, it might affect you on the sort of bigger scale, because if inflation is running away, interest rates might have to rise and that might affect your mortgage payments and things like that. But generally speaking, it doesn't feel like a big factor, really. Now, there's some exceptions to that, because the measures of inflation are just that, they're measures. But in real life, very often inflation feels very different. And I'll use the example of fuel. I mean, it seems only, a year, 18 months ago that it used to cost me 45 quid to fill up my car with diesel. Now it always costs me more than £60. Now that's some inflation, certainly a lot more than the headline rate of about 3.7% price increases that we're supposedly experiencing at the moment. Food has gone up more than the headline rate as well. And so, these are sort of very specific examples where price inflation might directly affect you. I'm about to change my car and I'm starting to think, well, I've got a pretty powerful turbo diesel at the moment. Do I need a car that powerful and that thirsty? Probably not. I might save myself some money and put that extra money that I save away for the future. So you tend not to worry too much about inflation when you're in employment. But inflation is a massive factor when you stop working. Primarily that's because you've done your amassing, you've worked and earned, and hopefully you've set money aside, and you've done that now, and now you're in the stage where you start to draw off that money and you enter the biggest holiday of your life, which is retirement, and you are now dependent on your pension income and whatever savings you've amassed. So that's a factor. One of the biggest reasons that inflation in retirement is a big deal is because retired people tend to spend a bigger proportion of their income on things like food and fuel. And because those things very often rise significantly higher than the headline rate of inflation, it's a big deal. You need to sort of try and factor in that when you're planning how much you will need. You might have enough money to spend now, but will you still have enough money in 10 years' time? And that's where we use a process called cash flow modelling, which can try and factor that in and find out whether or not you're going to run out of money. So let me know if you want any further questions on that answering. So if you spend proportionally more on food and fuel, then inflation is a big deal. So when you are coming into retirement and you are planning with your very competent financial advisor what your retirement sources of income are going to be, you need to think about whether or not they are going to increase every year. So the state pension, for example, the old age pension, which all of us get if we pay enough national insurance, that actually rises every year and should hopefully keep pace with inflation or near as damn it. So that's good, because it means that your income is going to go up every year. Perhaps if you're in a company pension, that almost certainly will rise every year, particularly if it's a final salary pension. will rise every year once you start taking the income from it. And so that's good, in which case it's like being employed, your income rises every year. But if you're buying an annuity, look back to, I can't remember what episode, look at the index and find out, it's in the pensions section. But if you're buying an annuity, one of the choices you've got is whether you have a level annuity, which stays the same in pounds terms for the rest of your life, or whether you have one which goes up every year. Well, if you choose the level one, then every year the buying power of your pound goes down because inflation goes up. And it can make a real difference. So if you retire at 65, the odds are you'll live until you're 87, something like that. So you've got 22 years of inflation to work against you. So it's really important, particularly when you come to retirement, that you factor in inflation. But it's also important if you are doing some long-term planning, like, you know, say you have a new baby, but you think you might want to save up for her wedding when she's 25 or 35 or whatever. And you might think, well, what does a wedding cost now? And you might say, I don't know, 10,000 quid. That's probably woefully underestimated, actually, but let's call it 10,000 quid. Well, it isn't going to be 10,000 pounds in 25 years' time, is it? It's probably going to be 25,000 pounds. And so you've got to plan for that. So when you take out any savings plan, the illustration that you get with it will tell you what you might expect to get out of it, but it always will have a caveat on there. Remember that the money that we're sort of quoting you will buy you less in the future due to inflation. So inflation is simply the rise in prices, but as far as how it affects you, it's the reduction in the buying power of your money. Okay? Hope that's helpful. I might come back to this again and perhaps do some examples of the power of inflation, but you can also look back to the power of compounding, which is a really early video for sort of the flip side of that. You can see how compounding works, while inflation almost works in reverse, really. But I hope that's helpful. What are we going to go on to next? Can't quite remember, so I will see you next time, and thanks for watching. Goodbye from Mares Iron Beach.